Hey everybody, this is Brian Yellow on Origin Stories on Creativity number 44. I had Melissa Walshe. She is a speculative author. She writes fantasy, science fiction. I really enjoyed the conversation because an artist can go in a very wide range of subjects. She's from Maine. She knits. She is a believer in making sure that onions get cooked for at least an hour if you're going to caramelize them. I am not one to cook onions for an hour. I think that if they look brown, they're done. An hour is a long time. I think that I'm going to try that from now on. I mean, I do like to cook. I enjoy cooking. And when she said that she was going to cook onions for the duration of our conversation, I was impressed. I like this eggplant dish that I found in an Israeli cookbook, and it does call for caramelized onions, and the darker the onions are, the better they are, and the more onions that I cook, the faster they go in my family, and I cannot get them caramelized enough. And when she said that she was going to cook them for an hour, I was like, I want to cook that dish very badly now. Melissa Walshe was a joy to talk to. She has a series called Autumn's Sister. Sequel of it is called Autumn's Daughter. Both of them are available on Amazon at the moment. What drew her to my attention was Jason Abbott's mentioning that she had leased a table at PortCon. And what's interesting about that to me is that she said that she got her money back within a weekend. I mean, she sold books enough and merchandise enough to actually get her everything that she invested over that weekend returned to her pocket. And she got basically a fan base built up. It was an interesting concept to me. Not only do I love Comic-Cons, not only do I love getting out there and meeting people, but she got to talk her work. She got people to read her work. She got to enhance her visibility. What a great idea. I mean, they check things off the list. Comic-Con, people reading her stuff. She got to make a little bit of money. I mean, win-win-win, right? Melissa Walshe was a great guest, and I'm going to go ahead and leave it up to her. Show notes, we'll have everything that you need to know about her, obviously. And with no further ado, here's Melissa Walshe.
I think most writers, their writing career begins pretty much as soon as anybody puts a pen in their hand. But I suppose I got really serious after I finished graduate school.
Is it a pen or is it a book?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember far enough back, but I think as soon as I was capable of putting letters down on the page, I was writing stories. I don't know if I was telling stories before then. I don't remember that.
Which has been your favorite, do you think? Is it the literary journey, or is it the outer space type fantasy realms? Did you get a degree in creative writing, English? What'd you get a degree in? I guess I should ask that question.
Yeah. No, I did not get a degree in English. I thought about going in, but I think basically what you do with a degree in English is you teach high school students English, unless you want to do the whole traveling all over trying to make a PhD career out of it, which isn't really my style. So I decided not to go in for English, and instead I got my bachelor's in linguistics. And then I decided to do my master's actually in education for reasons that I haven't quite figured out yet, to be honest.
Interesting. Well, I got my degree in English, creative writing, and you were saying traveling around, which is basically how I spent my entire 20s and 30s traveling around, but not getting my PhD, just traveling around. So you're not teaching then?
I'm not. I ran a before and after school care program for a while, and I really enjoyed that way of interacting with the kids, but I don't have much of a head for the politics that you end up getting into working with schools. So I decided not to do that. And the other track you can do with an education degree is more of a research oriented, which I would enjoy. But again, until you get tenure, you have to kind of chase the jobs.
Yeah.
And I like stability.
You like stability, but you're a fiction writer.
Well,
That
that's
doesn't
not
go
what pays
hand
the
in hand.
bills, right?
Well, in terms of fiction writing, where do you
Mhm.
find your inspiration at?
Oh, I where don't I? It's a hard question to answer, honestly. I mean, I'm a magpie about ideas. Um, I read a lot, get really involved in pretty much any new interest that crosses my mind. I tend to fall down a rabbit hole of learning as much as I can in a really short period of time, and that tends to inspire different ideas and concepts. I get a lot of conversations talking with my husband about just ridiculous nonsense that turns into like, oh, I could actually write a story about that. Why not? Um, I don't totally know how to answer the question in a meaningful way for people who are like, where do I get ideas?
Where do I get ideas? Exactly. I mean, I was just thinking about that when you were saying you were talking to your husband. My poor wife, my God, she'll just lay next to me in bed in the morning when I come upstairs after, writing for a few hours, and I'll just just blab away endless amounts of sentences I just levy at her, and she just lays there and listens. Like, are you paying attention? Yes. I'm just waiting for a place to jump in. And it's like, okay. And then I just continue to talk.
Yeah. Yeah, no, John gets a fair amount of that too. He's pretty good about the jumping in and playing along with a silly idea. Like I have this novella I'm working on polishing up so I can start sending it out to prospective agents. And that one got started when I was like, what if the president of the United States wasn't actually a person, but was just like a human clone that was used as a computer to maintain a voting record? And it was just this, goofy idea, but we started riffing on it. And I realized that I actually had enough of a concept there that's like, yeah, all right, I can write a story about that.
So novella, we're going like 15,000 words or something of that nature, right?
Yeah, I think that it's at about 20,000 right now, but I'm not done with the final editing, so it may be a bit shorter.
It's such a fantastic feeling when you actually put words down and start a concept, getting from beginning to end. I'm there too right now, just starting a story and working my way through a second read through or writing, editing. It's a great feeling. We have Autumn's Daughter and Autumn's Sister. Those are the two books that you have for sale right now on Amazon.com,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're both fantasy.
Yes. Fantasy with a little bit of a sci-fi flair, I guess.
So what would we call them? Like fantasy science fiction?
Yeah, I think most people will more comfortably interpret them as fantasy, but I write fantasy from the perspective that what is fantastic is only things that could be interpreted through science but aren't yet. So
Okay.
it's if you imagine what magic would look like in the modern era to us as we stand and how we might approach that, you can imagine the first thing the scientists among us are going to do is say, well, let's figure out what's going on scientifically and break it down. So it has some elements of that.
Well, actually, that's what science fiction is, isn't it? It's the black box of science and trying to explain how things work in terms of that. And you can
Yeah.
make the science work in any way. I mean, basically, a layman's not going to understand. So, I mean, it's magic for me and you. I mean, it's
Right,
how you
right.
use the words. I love the idea of, I mean, you could replace the clone aspect of your novella with anything you want, a hologram. I mean, basically, who would know the difference, right? I mean, this guy
Sure.
that we have in the White House right now, he could be fake. He's a game show contestant. Who the hell knows? I mean, just hire him, put him in the Oval Office and say, you're the president now, guy. He's got signs of dementia anyway, doesn't he?
That's what analysts seem to say. Yeah, I don't know.
It's such a great concept, such a great idea. What can you tell us a little bit about us? I'm like there's a whole audience or something. Can you tell me a little bit
Sure.
about Autumn's Daughter, Autumn's Sister?
Sure, sure. So it's like I said, it's what I would call a coming of age border crossing fantasy in terms of the broad strokes it falls into. That's where you stick it in the literary categorizations. It's set in northern Maine, about an hour outside of Bangor.
That's where you're from, right, Maine?
I am from Maine, but south
How do
of
you
that. But
say Mainah? Maina?
Maine,
Oh, is that and you're that's what you call yourself when you're from Maine?
well, that's what you say when you're making fun of the way that some parts of Maine talk. I don't know very many people that actually use that accent day to day.
But you said
It's
that
more of a
you're
Downy.
Maine now, right? Or how do you say it? A Maine
Oh,
accent? I
oh,
was
on my
on your
yes.
something. I just read it when I was looking through the materials that you sent me, and I was like, "Oh man, what is this word?" I want to say Manaya.
No, no, no. Yeah, it's Maina. It's like
Dana.
we park our cars in Harvard Yard, you know. So it's just a little Maine humor there.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to quickly get that out of my way before I forget again.
No,
Um,
that's totally okay.
so it's a border crossing fantasy.
Yeah, yeah. So it starts out with this, average 16-year-old girl, as you would expect, and she's been having strange things happen to her of the you might call the magical variety, and she's trying to understand what's happening, whether she's causing these or whether they're happening to her. And her best friend is helping her in this process, and he's very science oriented. So he's the character who takes the let's break this down rationally perspective. And while they're in the middle of trying to figure this out, her younger sister goes missing, and she doesn't just go missing. Nobody in their life remembers that she ever had a younger sister except for her best friend, including their parents, teachers, her sister's best friends. There's just this blank hole where the sister used to be. So she and her best friend together set out to try to figure out what's happened to the younger sister, and in the process figure out what's going on with her own magical happenings, I guess. And they end up getting involved. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, please, you go ahead. I was just going to ask if this comes from a kind of reality bending, kind of multiverse situation. It
It
sounds like.
does. It does. Very quickly, they end up in this other realm, and they find that there are this offshoot of humanity, I guess, is the best way to put it. I don't know what the right evolutionary term is. Another race, because they can still interbreed with humans, so I guess they're not another species at this point. But basically, there is a subset of humans way back in evolutionary history that evolved quite by accident this mental capacity for perceiving something that's in a sort of hand waving way. It's like quantum mechanics or quantum entanglement. No scientist would back me up on quantum entanglement working this way. So it's its own thing that we don't understand yet, essentially. Anyway, so as they were able to perceive these connections between different things, they also were able to manipulate them, because that perception is necessary for the manipulation. And so they essentially had magical powers within the course of a couple generations, and they started splitting off from just regular humans. And at one point in time, they just took up their entire culture and they moved to an alternate dimension that they could access because of these cultures, and ended up cutting themselves off from humanity for political reasons. So what's happened here is that there's a reconnection between the worlds going on, and that's at the root of what's happening with the main character.
That's fascinating. I'm reading *Sapiens* right now. Are you familiar with that book? It's
No,
basically
it's
oh god, he has a very Hebrew-esque name. I'm not even sure how to pronounce it, but it's basically a history of the last million years of the human race, all like 9 branches of Homo, whatever have you. It's just a really fascinating look at humans and all the derivatives that we've been and have branched off from, like Neanderthals and what have you. It's a really interesting look at what we've devolved from and what we might end up. He's like a sequel to this book that explains what we might be eventually going into the future. Quantum entanglement is just a great idea. Do you know how to get into that as far as like a term? I mean, what exactly is it? I mean, you say you're using it wrong, not necessarily, or yes, you are.
Well, no, I mean, what's happening in my book isn't really quantum entanglement, but it was inspired by the idea of quantum entanglement. So
could you go into it?
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
No, yeah, I can go into it without giving too much away. Might spoil a little bit at the beginning, but they figure this out quickly. So quantum entanglement, just for anyone listening who has never heard the term before, it's just the idea that you have quantum elements, and I'm going to mangle this. No physicist is going to agree with anything I say here, I'm sure. But the idea that you, one particle and its behavior in one location can impact a particle at a remote location that is only quantumly connected. And it is possible to manipulate actual quantum entanglement to some degree. There are efforts to build computers around this concept, and they've been teleporting particles, I think.
Didn't the Chinese just recently say they beamed something from one location to another with this same kind of concept?
Yes, exactly.
Yes. No,
exactly.
recently within the last couple months, right? They said that they did this X thing.
Yes. And
It's not
it's
really like
well worth
beaming.
reading up on the research.
They made something react in one location and another, like they had. Oh, I can't explain it either, but I'll let you do it. I'm sorry, but you just made me very excited because I remember that they made something happen with this quantum entanglement.
Yeah,
theory.
and something very cool. I mean, beyond the computation.
Like physically something happened based on this theory.
Yeah, physical particle. And we're talking like microscopic scale here. So it's a long way from anything like I'm even talking about in my book.
Beat me up, Scotty, is not happening tomorrow, basically.
Right, exactly. No, probably not for decades at all. There's lots of problems with that. But yeah, so in the book, if you imagine that on a more macroscopic scale, the idea is that everything around you has a tie of dependencies. The trees are dependent on the soil, on the nutrients, on the fungal networks between them, on the air, on the water. Humans are dependent on other humans, on food, on the surfaces they stand on to not fall down. So you can just imagine that, not unlike the Force from Star Wars, we're all connected by obligation, essentially. And the idea is that if you can see these ties of obligation, you can move them and shift them and alter the nature of reality around you. And that's the very rough premise of the way magic works in the books. And there are some more complicated rules, but I hesitate to bring them up just because I'll get them wrong. I always have to refer to my world building database when I'm talking about the magic rules.
Well, that's interesting because that's the way any physicality kind of works. That's the way your body works. I mean, the blood pumps through the heart, and the heart pumps because of the blood, and the brain works because of the blood flowing through it, and the lungs are operating because of the air that are, just the cause and effect that kind of governs life as a general whole. Gravity and physics and everything functions because of rules and cause and effect. I mean, I like it. I mean, it has to have, I mean, that's one of the things I've kind of noticed with fantasy and science fiction is the development of rules and why things take place.
Yeah, it's one of those things that if people pay too much attention to, it gets exhausting. But if you don't pay enough attention to it, feels sloppy. So it's a real challenge to hit that middle balance of, I've given you enough rules to give you something to think about, but not so many that you're going to catch me in my own mistakes in the third book, right?
I guess that's the balance, though, isn't it? You don't want people to stop and think, how does this not work? And you want people to push through and say, my God, this is an amazing piece of work. And I'm not going to think about this because I really want to get to the next page.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I mean when they're reading the book, but what I'd love is after they put the book down for them to be thinking, gee, if I had that power, what would I do with it? That's the question that you want to leave people with about your magic system, is giving them scope for imagination in terms of how they would inhabit the world if they were to suddenly find themselves with these powers.
I think UPS is delivering a package. My dog is going crazy.
Yeah, my dog can't stand the UPS guy either.
The only time she basically sleeps all day until the UPS guy gets here and growls and leaves the room when I walk into a room. Oh, it's raining like crazy. Poor UPS guy.
I know, I wouldn't want that job in bad weather.
I wouldn't want that job, period, nowadays. I don't think they get treated very well anymore, if they ever did.
Yeah, it's got to be hard work.
You would a couple years ago, you would have thought that Amazon would be a good job, but not anymore. I think they get treated bad too there.
I know.
The whole situation nowadays seems to be pretty sad.
It's like anytime you want to give people really good service for cheap, it's going to be the employees that suffer.
Yeah, Walmart's another example of that, isn't it? You walk in, you see those rollback prices, you're like, oh. When I was a kid, I would walk into Walmart and just felt instantly bad for the cashiers. I had no idea why. I just felt depressed for them.
Yeah, I hate going into Walmart. I try to avoid it because of that.
That's one good thing about where I live. There are no Walmarts.
Oh, nice, nice.
Yeah, we have Targets. There's a Kmart in Midtown, but that's about it. And that's another place that makes me
Kmart.
sad. There's like a
Yeah, I'm better.
random Kmart on like 34th Street.
Huh. Yeah, I don't think I've been into a Kmart since I was like 15.
That's a nice Kmart too. It's like significantly nicer than any Kmart I've ever been into.
Huh.
Random. It's the most random Kmart. But anyway, it's not fantastical enough to make it into a novel, so won't talk too much about it. You know what is fantastic is I can't segue from Kmart
All
into
right.
writing.
It's a tough one. We got off on a tangent there.
Let's see, cut this out. Let's see, segue from Kmart. No, no, it really is interesting. I'm trying my hardest to use, avoid magic at all costs and try to use physics and actual science. And it's difficult. It's really, truly difficult. I just don't know how to do it.
Yeah, well, I mean, if
I
you
don't
don't
want
have
to.
an advanced degree in it, you're gonna get stuff wrong. And I worry about that all the time in my Sentinel stuff, which is much more in space and plays with gravity and stuff like that. That just can go off.
Tell me about your Sentinel stuff. That I'm not seeing that on your website.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I sent you a link to a sample from the Sentinel series that I posted after I finished NaNoWriMo 2 years back, I think. That's from the Sentinel series. And the idea there is, if you imagine there's an extra dimensional being who likes to possess humans and give them something like superpowers that they don't have complete control over, and then use them to affect change for sort of a progressive social agenda throughout the galaxy. Um, and imagine that this person decides to possess a single mom who has just left an abusive relationship, and press play. So my main character is really struggling with the lack of autonomy that's been foisted upon her along with these superpowers. At the same time as she wants to do good and she likes doing good, but she also just wants to be her own person. So that they get time, space, history, sort of the Doctor Who range of circumstances.
By lack of autonomy, what does that mean? She battled with the child. She has that responsibility, and she can't necessarily do whatever she wants whenever she wants to do it.
Well, I mean, that comes up occasionally too, but it's more she just wants to have her own life, take care of her kids, find her feet outside of the context of this abusive marriage that she's finally gotten out of. And while she's struggling to do that, she stops to help somebody, and by helping somebody, she gets imbued with these powers by this creature who's like, oh, you seem like a helpful person, let me give you superpowers. But because these superpowers aren't just some gift that's given to her, they're the result of a possession of sorts by this extra dimensional being. And possession is just it's a rough way to describe it. It's not a great term for it, but she doesn't always have a great ability to communicate with this other being who doesn't fully understand humans for all that she wants to help humans. So she'll be in the middle of a work meeting or talking to her son's preschool teacher, and all of a sudden she's standing on a spaceship that's about to deal with explosive decompression, and she has to save this entire set of sentient plants that have been transported into the ship against their will. So
that's fascinating. So when she does that, she does this thing. Does she go right back to where she's standing in front of her child's preschool teacher and like nothing's happened?
Right, exactly. So
wow,
she's
the ramifications of that on the human mind must be amazing. You've
well,
just
and
done
that's what
something
I'm interested in.
that's interesting. That's really fascinating because you have then I don't know what you're dealing with in terms of the character, but in my mind it goes instantly to this PTSD. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You have this mind that doesn't really bend very well to stress. You put it under extreme stress, you make it bend and almost break, and then you put it right back into a normal situation where you have to deal with this mundane hey, I'm a preschool teacher and your kid bit this other kid. What are you going to do about it? Well, you know, I
Right.
just had to save 20,000 people from imminent death and you're dumb. How do you deal with that? How do you not just snap the preschool teacher's neck or whatever the hell power she has or doesn't have at that particular moment in time? That's really fascinating to
Yeah,
me
thanks.
as as a veteran. I mean, that's what I'm thinking about. Like, this is stupid. You know, I just killed 30 people 2 years ago, and you're a retarded convenience store clerk. You know,
Yeah,
that's to me what I think. That's
and
very fascinating to me.
that's one of the reasons that's pretty much what I was setting out to deal with, because I wanted to look at the stress and the trauma resulting from an abusive relationship and how you recover from that. And that
Oh
is going to
yeah,
be, it's going
and
to
she already
connect
has
that
that to deal with
PTSD.
too. She's already a trauma victim.
Right. So what she's dealing with on the sci-fi level mirrors what she's dealing with on the personal level. So it allows me to use the two to help resolve the problems across the board for her, and also intensify the effect so you can see it very clearly.
Does she have
Um,
like that hero syndrome? If that's a thing, unless she wants to fix everybody, make everything better, or
this
she
is the thing I think is interesting about her. She doesn't. She just wants to be okay,
be
and she
left
just
alone.
wants to get through the day. You know.
Yeah, that's a really interesting concept. So, can you define yourself as an artist? Do you know where you're? I think I already asked you that to begin with, and I don't know if you said you had an answer, but
I mean, define myself as an artist. How do you mean? Like
well,
categorically? Or
I love your idea of the president not necessarily being a leader, but instead being this thing that just collects data about the people who voted for him or didn't vote for him. I like that as an idea. I like this woman who is a victim all on herself, and I like that. I like your idea of these stories. Um, your novels are interesting as well, and they're a trilogy. They're
thank
a
you.
series. They're ongoing.
Yeah, it's a
They're
trilogy
nice.
that's self-contained. It's almost complete.
It's almost done. You're working on the third one now.
Yeah, yeah, working on getting it to beta readers.
Beta reader, so you're finished,
Yeah,
basically.
I definitely have a full draft. I'm just going through the last set of edits before I let other people look at it.
And the novella's done,
Yeah,
basically.
that's in the same stage. Again, I need to finish up some edits before I start sending it out to people.
So are you fresh out of projects, or do you have something cooking that you're working on or about to work
Oh,
on?
no, I'm mid-stride in what I started during NaNoWriMo last year, which is what I'm loosely calling my Space Hobbits novel.
Oh, I like that.
So,
Space Hobbits. Do you find
yeah.
that these stories all connect on some level? I mean, is this the president in some kind of interconnected world, galaxy?
No,
No?
no, I, I get interesting ideas, and when I think of both a plot, a concept, and a set of people that I'd like to see engaging with that concept, that's my seed for starting on something. I Right now I'm independently published, and I've kind of intentionally cultivated that independence instead of with a novella. I want to try working with a publisher just to test that process. But I like being independent because I don't feel like I'm required to pigeonhole myself. You know what I mean? I don't want to write young adult fantasy for the rest of my life. I want to
Yeah.
explore the project that's interesting to me.
I don't think the world works like that anymore, to tell you the absolute truth. I mean,
Yeah.
what your job is to gather your resources and be the best artist you could be, right? And then by being the best artist you could be, you build an audience around yourself, and hopefully that audience gets as big as possible, and then you get recognized, and then somebody buys your novel, or many people buy your novel, and you sell that novel to whoever wants to buy it, and maybe the rights become this and that and the other thing, and you just keep
Yeah.
writing novels, and that's basically your job,
That's what I hope. That's certainly
right? I
what
mean,
I
that
hope.
seems to be what people are doing nowadays.
It's tricky though. There are a lot of independently published people who, I mean, like myself, that don't really see a ton of sales.
No,
Um,
yeah, I think it's just
but
a
and you
sludge
get the
pile.
people
It's so
like Andy
gigantic.
Weir.
Yeah, Andy Weir
Yeah.
is my hero in terms of this, and that's who I'm basically
Right. Like
modeling it all off of. I mean, he wrote The Egg. Have you read that?
I haven't read that.
Oh God, why has
I'll
nobody ever
have
read
to
it?
though.
You have to Google it. It's so beautiful in terms of not just a story, which is one of my favorite 800 word I'll call it what would you call it? A flash story, a flash fiction piece,
Yes.
microfiction.
Yeah.
It's a beautifully written story. It translated into 25 different languages, but it catapulted
Wow.
him to a certain level of fame, and he started writing The Martian. Maybe I'm messing up his biography a little bit, but in terms of when he was writing The Martian, he was writing it with an audience. You know, he'd write a chapter and he'd have comments coming back, oh, you need to do this, that, and the other thing to that chapter, and he would rewrite that chapter. So he wrote The Martian, and obviously what happened with The Martian was it got published, and then Ridley Scott made the movie. And now we're talking about, you know, Andy Weir on this podcast, and
Right.
millions of other people know his name. Now, I'm pretty certain he doesn't care that we're talking about him, but, you know, he cashed some checks, and he's writing
Yeah. No. Well, he's glad that he's being talked about by people he'll never hear about, right?
Exactly.
Well, hopefully you'll
You know,
hear about
the
us.
funny thing is, you know, you read The Martian, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a really good novel. It was very
I couldn't put
compelling.
it down.
Couldn't me either. I read it in like a day and a half or something.
Yeah.
I read the first chapter of his Moon book. I don't know. Maybe I built up Andy Weir too much. Maybe I'm looking forward to this next novel of his with an expectation on a level that he could never compare to. But I don't think it's I don't think it's going to be as good.
I'd be interested to compare The Martian to other stuff. I didn't realize he was taking feedback from people as he was writing it, because it would be interesting to see if that ends up producing a much tighter book than working through the traditional publishing process.
And that's what I'm looking
what I mean, where you just have an editor.
It's just one person working with him as opposed to many dozens, if not hundreds of people offering him feedback as he's going along.
Yeah.
But I know he can write because The Egg is a genius piece of fiction. And here, let me go ahead and find it, and I'll send you a link.
Great. Yeah, thanks.
On my mind. I mean, if you're on Reddit, you've seen links to this thing.
I'm not really on Reddit.
Oh, okay. The Egg.
I do social media for a living, so I kind of get burned out on it in my off hours.
What do you do social media with? Just the writing?
Well, the writing, I work for a web development firm. That's what actually pays my bills at this stage of my career. And so I do a lot of writing social media posts and reading internet articles and whatnot for clients. So I'm the ghost behind a couple of corporate identities.
I would say that The Egg is a genre of speculative fiction called death fantasy, you know, taking place in the afterlife.
Okay, yeah.
So I enjoy that kind of stuff. I liked When Dreams May Come a lot, and I can never remember who the author of that is.
Well, I have a recommendation that I'll pass along that I haven't read that people have been talking about, though, which is Lincoln and the Bardo. Have you read that yet?
No.
If you like the death fantasy, Lincoln and the Bardo. I don't actually know how to spell Bardo because I haven't seen it in print yet, but I have a number of people whose opinions on books I definitely trust recommend it to me.
Bardo.
So that's what I'm looking forward to reading.
Do you think it's B-A-R-D-O?
Let me check for you. It's it's B-A-R-D-O. It's George Saunders.
George Saunders, okay.
I'm sorry, it's Lincoln in the Bardo.
In the Bardo, okay, I found it.
Okay.
All right. And it's supposed to be amazing death fantasy?
Yeah, I think that's how I'd classify it, given the reviews that have been given to me, which is, again, this is secondhand, but this is the one I'm really looking forward to reading next.
Well, you've given me a novel, and I've given you an 800 piece of short fiction. That's not
which
fair.
I'm also looking forward to.
No, I think you should enjoy. It's very interesting. It's a really great way to look at life and I don't know, life.
Yeah, sure.
And a literary career too, because you never know. I mean, talk about, my wife calls it lightning in a bottle. It's kind of cliche to look at it like that, but in terms of you write something and then boom, you know, you never know what'll happen. That's why you just got to keep going and doing and trying to figure this whole thing out, this mess.
Yeah.
You can't count on anything. It could happen from a tweet. Hopefully a good one. I mean, that poor woman who got on a plane to South Africa and saying something horrible. She got off the plane with no job.
I was so horrified for her, especially because the intent of her tweet was the exact opposite from the way people took it.
Obviously, it was her poor, tasteful poor joke, but I mean, her life didn't get turned upside down. It just makes
Yeah.
don't make horribly racist tweets on Twitter. I guess I would hope that you have more taste than not you personally. Anybody, don't make bad jokes on in public places. It's like screaming out in the mall bad words. I guess.
Yeah, it's something I always worry about because all it takes is one moment of distracted judgment, distracted tweeting where you're saying something to your friend. You're like, oh, that would be funny. And you fail to make that code switching decision between what's funny with a friend and what's funny with the public.
Yeah.
And
or
it's
misunderstanding.
So easy to do.
You know those hashtag games that people play all the time on Twitter. And you just say something stupid, and somebody had said something stupid during the last terrorist attack in London. He saw one and he made a joke, and not realizing there had just been a horrible terrorist attack, and it went viral. He just got millions and millions of people just slamming him, and he was a gamer person, trying to start something on YouTube and Twitter, and bye-bye career, bye-bye name. He made some stupid comment, and he thought he was playing a hashtag game.
Oh,
it's just a nightmare. You just really have to be careful. Now I check. I click on it. Okay, good. This is just a game. I will play.
Right.
And that's the exact opposite of the Andy Weir situation that we were just talking about. That's lightning not in a bottle. That's on top of your head. It's getting struck with lightning.
Yeah, it's definitely don't want to be on the wrong side of that either way.
Yeah, I guess in terms of our careers going south instead of north.
Yeah.
I guess both ways you can freeze to death.
Yeah, well,
I mean, what
it's true.
So I mean, I guess getting back on topic, we talked about going indie versus traditional, and I kind of jumped over you a little bit and told you my opinions.
Sure.
What is your plans going forward? I mean, do you have like an action plan?
Yeah, I suppose. Right now, I'm working on selling the She Diaries, which is the Autumn's Daughter and following, and I'm taking that to
first person? Do you write it in first person?
Yeah, well, actually, one of the interesting things about the series that I think would make it hard to sell traditionally is that each of them is written in first person from a different character's perspective, because it follows, first the main character and then the sister they were looking for, and then another girl who's part of the first two books, because they all have a different angle and different connections on the political situation. So I'm sort of telling the story of the world through their different eyes. So they're sequential. They're not from the same set of events. But yeah, they're all first person.
I could see how that could work in a multiverse type of situation, but are you playing it from that angle?
No, it's just that when the first book with Autumn Daughter, you kind of get to a point where Neve, who's the main character in that one, you resolve the primary questions of her personal story. So when you look at the political questions that have been left unresolved, she's not the most interesting person to stick with. So instead, I follow her sister Birdie in her personal story, which is about recovering from the trauma she's been through in the first book. And then that leads to a set of events where there are, furthermore, it's, Empire Strikes Back, kind of cliffhangers on a few different things at the end of the second book. And in order to follow the interesting personal story, you've got to jump over to the third character, Edelia, who I can't really explain her role without spoiling things for people who want to read the first book. But
I understand. It's very interesting writing the whole novel thing. You said the first book. My novel on Amazon right now, Compounded Interest, I want to pull it off right now, and I want to write more to it. I want to add sections to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get that impulse all the time.
Nobody's paid any attention to it. So I mean, it's not like somebody's going, "Oh, you changed this novel." No, nobody cares. Nobody's read the stupid thing. So it's like, fine, I'll just go ahead and do that. Jason Abbott, who actually pointed me in your direction.
Oh yeah, I met him at PortCon.
He's a really cool guy, and he's so nice too. I'm so happy that I met him. He met him through Reddit, through the Fantasy Writer subreddit. highly recommend. If you've never checked it out, check it out.
Okay.
But he gave me the best advice in the world. He said, if you want to sell your first book, write a second book. If you want to sell your second book and your first book, write a third book. But I think in terms of writing, you can never, ever fall in love with your writing. You just got to keep going, right? Because every piece that you write is always going to be your strongest piece of fiction.
If you're moving in the right direction anyway.
Right? And what's the wrong direction?
Well, the wrong direction is, oh, I really like the first thing I wrote better than everything else I've done. It's like, that's not growth, right?
What, is it ego? Do you think it's ego? I mean, is it like, I'm the best and I'm never going to have to grow, so I'm just going to clamp down and never.
Yeah. I think ego does get involved with, right? Like I run into it a lot with the writers at workshops that I teach, but there's a reason that they never get past this one little piece of short story that they've been workshopping for 10 years. And it's because they can't let themselves grow and they can't let go of what they've done. And it's so hard. I look back at Autumn's Daughter and I catch continuity errors or spelling mistakes and plot holes or approaches to it, something I think differently about now. And I cringe, right? And that one I only wrote 5 years ago. So
I mean, you have a choice,
have to let go and move on.
You can spend the rest of your life going, okay, fuck, the word that I just used anyway.
That's all right.
I could spend the rest of my life fixing all those holes and issues and misspelling. There's obviously going to be probably grammatical issues that is your editor is not being picked, your editor didn't pick up or whatever. I could spend the rest of my life editing this novel, or I could write the second one. I could write a third one, or I could write a fourth one, and I just keep going and going and going and hope for the best. Or I know people like that. It just seems like they stop and they're like treading water going, all right, now what?
Yeah, and I think there are two pieces is that is you have to be able to hear feedback and make use of it in a forward direction. You have to forgive yourself. Yeah, you have to forgive yourself for what you screwed up in the past because there's always something. But you have to accept the feedback and then put it to work in your next project instead of feeling like a failure because you didn't hear it in time to fix the first time you did it,
It's frustrating though, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's really frustrating because as indie writers, we don't really have the opportunity to look back. We really do have to power forward.
Yeah. I think indie or published, if you're doing anything creative, you're going to get paralyzed if you can't. And you're not going to grow if you can't accept the feedback. So it's that balancing spot between being able to hear it and not getting tied down by it.
Because honestly, I mean, when you look at somebody's body of work and you see one novel, you're like, I'm speaking of myself particularly, you're not as impressed. I mean, not just myself. If I see somebody and they have one novel, I'm like, okay, fine, write another one.
Right.
Or if they have two, it's like write a third one or whatnot. I want to see an effort. When I see like Stephen King, I did a podcast on him recently. I have another endeavor where I'm trying to do speculative authors and kind of explore their careers and their works. And I look at Stephen King and I think the guy's made $400 million over the course of the last 40 years of his career. Yeah. And he's written 40 novels. And when you look at his IMDb, he's, powered through 280 credits worth of, he's been a writer on 280 productions, basically. Like, dude, that's impressive. It's impressive. He's been married to the same woman for the last, 45 years, 50 years of his life. The guy's honorable and he's powerful in terms of his profession. And people used to make fun of him, right? I mean, he was never considered a great writer, but at the end of the day, in 10, 20 years when he dies, people are going to look back and say, he was king of letters basically for the most of his life.
Yeah, well, and I gotta tell you, I haven't read a lot of Stephen King because I'm not much into the horror, and I can only take so much of his stuff at a time. But the things that I have read, the reason he's popular is because he has a grasp on human motivation.
Character.
The last thing I read was Under the Dome. Yeah, and man, I tell you what, I cannot. After reading Under the Dome, I have such a hard time driving past local cops because I live in Lisbon, which is where he went to high school and grew up. And you can see so much of the influence in his thinking and Under the Dome from rural Maine, rural small town Maine, the power dynamics are definitely there, and it makes living here just that much creepier from a day-to-day basis.
Well, Derry is like
Um,
made up though, isn't it? There's no town called Derry, Maine,
no,
right?
yeah, no, it's made up. It's made up, but it's just those patterns of human behavior. The who has
That's what he's good
influence,
at.
how the town council stuff works, and he's phenomenal at it. So I consider him a very serious literary writer, to be honest.
Right? And
People
he's
might
just,
make fun of me for saying that, but
oh, I don't think they should. I don't think they should. And it's not, he is really good at the horror stuff, but he has won so many fantasy and science fiction awards throughout his career. I don't even know if there are horror fiction awards. Honestly, I don't read that stuff.
I don't either. No, me neither.
But when I was going through his, bibliography, I noticed that I've read a lot of his work, and it's kind of cool to think that, he's done so much with his career. But this is
Yeah.
not a Stephen King podcast.
Oh, that's okay.
Who are
Gotta
your
give the man
favorite?
his props.
What's that? I'm sorry.
Oh, so just gotta give the man his props.
No, you really do. And there are so many others out there too. Who do you like? Who do you like to read?
Yeah, let's see. Okay, well, one of my favorite, if we're talking to a science fiction audience, if you haven't read Mary Dariah Russell's The Sparrow and Children of God, you got to go do it tonight. That's absolutely one of the best books I've ever read.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Who is that? I'm sorry. I'm going to take that down.
Yes. Yeah, do. This is one that I've recommended to so many people, and I've bought maybe 10 copies of this book because every time I've loaned it out, it hasn't made it back.
Oh, no.
Because people just fall in love with it. Well, it makes me happy in a way because it means it's out there and being loved and being passed on. And they're like, oh, I loaned it to somebody who loaned it to somebody. So it's making the rounds. My in-laws are actually, they're reading it with their book group, which is, so I can't describe the plot in any way that makes it sound innovative, but she's another one who really understands. She did her research on the science and makes that aspect of it interesting. There's a lot of linguistics in it, and that's coming out of her professional background. So that's very rich and interesting. But she understands the humans and the human motivations. And she deals with the conflict between having a strong faith and having that faith ripped away from you by the real world just being awful. And she does it in a very subtle and rich and lovely way that leaves you surprised and delighted and full range of human emotions.
Can you, I'm sorry, one more time, would you mind providing the author's name?
Yes, it's Mary Dariah, which is Doria, and Russell is her last name.
Okay. Mary Dariah Russell. And which one of her books? The Sparrow. Okay.
The Sparrow, and the sequel, which is Children of God.
I love how you talk about literature.
Oh, thanks.
It's very crisp. It's very specific.
Also, the books that I really love.
That was just going to the 2019 the SETI program discovers radio broadcasts in the vicinity of Alpha Centauri. So, I mean, you call yourself a fantasy author and science fiction author, but I would actually classify you as a science fiction author with
definitely my first love.
Yeah.
I mean, I tell this story too many times, but when I was maybe 6 or 7, I first started watching Star Trek Next Gen with my parents.
Mm-hmm.
And it was usually on when I was supposed to be in bed. So I'd sneak out of bed and I'd sit in the hallway where I could see just a corner of the TV, but I could hear what was going on. And I just loved it that much that I was willing to risk getting grounded to catch it.
Oh, man. If my children wanted to watch Star Trek at 6, I would totally reward them by letting them stay up forever. I can't wait, honestly. I used to, they're only 2 right now, 2 years and 4 months. I used to watch the original series with them when they were younger.
Huh.
That and football, which my wife hates, but
I'm with your wife on that one.
My daughter was watching a little bit of the Hall of Fame game with me the other night, and she was watching it with me. My son could not care less, though.
Yeah.
So who else? Who else would you recommend?
For authors. Well, Salman Rushdie is another of my favorites.
I have tried to read him, especially his take on Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, that's in Step Across This Line, right? It's the first essay in there.
Mm-mm. I
I
can't remember
think,
what it was called. I had to read it for a film theory class. Maybe that's why. Any book recommended in a class is automatically is not a favorite of mine. I think it's the rebel
well,
in me. It's like, oh, you want me to read this, Mr. Professor? Well, then I'm going to hate this book.
yeah. It might be Haroon in the Sea of Stories. Is that?
I'm going to look up
Because he has an
Salman
essay
Rushdie right
that's
now.
about the Wizard of Oz.
It was a whole book. Salman Rushdie. But that's the only book actually I've tried to read of his.
He's a challenging read, and he's much more literary read, but I would call him, he's literary fiction with a quality of fantastic realism, or I'm not really sure how to classify him, but he has such a beautiful grasp of language. And it takes me forever to read anything by his because every sentence is just packed and I have to sit and go back and chew it. So it's not your typical quick romp or beach read. It took me 6 months to finish reading Midnight's Children, which I just put down, but it's worth it.
No, my problem is I get distracted. I like
Yeah.
video games, and I used to like video games. I have no time to play them anymore. And science fiction novels. So I will get stuck in stupid stuff, and all the important things get passed to the side.
Yeah, I understand that. Since hitting adulthood, I have a lot less. Well, that's why it took me 6 months to get through that because I'd read a chapter every 2 to 3 days, and that's the only attention and energy I could muster for it because it's easy to fall asleep at the end of a busy workday when you're trying to unpack a difficult paragraph.
Yeah, well, important adult people like yourself impress me because you actually do what you say you're going to do. But is it possible that it was just called The Wizard of Oz, BFI Film Classics? Because that's the only thing on here that really makes sense.
I don't know. He has a book of essays called Step Across This Line. And there
Yeah.
isn't the first, like, maybe third of the book is a prolonged essay about the Wizard of Oz and his experience as an exile when he had the jihad placed on his head. And
Maybe it was.
reading it
And they
made
were
me
published.
homesick for Kashmir.
They were published around the same time, 1992, 2002 is Step Across This Line that was collected and published in 2002. The first essay, it was 1992, and the Wizard of Oz essay was published in 1992, so possibly the same thing. It was
Okay.
it was a real thin publication.
Yeah, it probably was then.
I think I ended up withdrawing from that class, so I was a wonderful student. I'm surprised I even have a degree.
Yeah, and I will say that one is it's very different than his other work because it's a nonfiction. And if the best entry point to Salman Rushdie for appreciating his language style without having to wrestle with the challenging concepts in some of his other stuff is Haroon in the Sea of Stories, which is another one that this one I don't loan out to people because I know I won't get it back, and I kind of treasure the copy that I do have. That one is about a boy whose father loses his ability to tell stories after his mother leaves them, and about their journey to recover his father's gift of the gab. And it's more fantasy than anything else. But
so he actually writes in magic realism, though, doesn't he? In terms of
yeah,
narrative fiction.
And that's very clear in his more recent one, which is the one with all the numbers in it. Hang on a second, I'm going to grab it off the shelf. I can't remember. It's 2 years, 8 months, and 28 nights. That I think that's his most recently published one, and that's another one that's not as hard to read. Yeah.
He's got one coming out called The Golden House in 2017. I'm not sure what's happening with that, though. I'm looking at his Wikipedia page. Not that I'm all of a sudden expert on Salman Rushdie.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I have downloaded everything of his into my brain.
That'd be a good trick.
Right?
Yeah.
I am an android. There's just so many books out there. There's no way. I wish.
No, I think the list of books that I have promised people I would read is taller than I am if I stack them all up. So it's hard to get
Currently
through.
trying to read a Mitch Albom book right now called Phone Calls from Heaven. I'm just like halfway through it. It's taking me the longest time to make my way through it. I'm like embarrassed about the amount of time that it's taken me to read this book.
Yeah, sometimes they
I'm
don't quite grab you. It's hard to.
I'm just so not having it right now. And there's another book that I want to read from him or by him coming up too called The Timekeeper or something along those lines. I'm doing a podcast on him in like on the 23rd of August. And these are the last two books I'm interested in reading. It's just taking me the longest time to read his stuff. I enjoy him. Tuesdays with Maury and The Five People You'll Meet in Heaven were just really good reads. Fast. It took me like a couple days to read through both of them, but this one I'm just not doing it. And I stopped reading that Sapiens book, which I really found interesting.
Yeah.
You know, archaeological, anthropological study of humans and where we came from is just really fascinating to me. This is just not happening though.
Yeah, it's funny, like you can have a less complicated, shorter book take way more time than something denser if it's not interesting. I was a friend loaned me this book about like nursing in post-war Great Britain, and it wasn't called The Midwife, but it was something kind of similar, but really badly written. And I couldn't get through it. It just sat on my shelf forever and a day. And now I'm reading this massive biography on Saint Edna Vincent, or Edna St. Vincent Millay, sorry, called Savage Beauty, and it's compelling. I'm just plowing right through it. I'll be done in no time.
What was it? What's it called?
It's good. Savage Beauty.
Yeah, that's
I
interesting.
think it's the first authorized biography of her, and she is a fascinating lady.
Another good one that I had to put down is Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. It's a autobiography about a woman who works in a crematorium in San Francisco. It's about aftercare of people who die. It's a really interesting look on just the death industry, how people are taken care of. She's very humorous. It's just a really great look at how, you know, we take care of the dead.
Yeah, I read Stiff, which was sounds like it probably has some overlap in content. What's that woman's name? Mary Roach. Stiff: The Curious Lives of Human Cadavers, and she talks something about the aftercare and the way that corpses are preserved, but also, you know, the research and the history behind how we've dealt with bodies and what taboos exist around them and why. That was a really good read.
It's interesting. This almost seems like the same book.
Yeah. So as you're describing it, I'm like, oh.
Mary Roach. It's not the same lady though, I don't think. I gotta read this.
I can't imagine she'd do two on the same subject.
No, of course not. But her name seems very, very familiar. She seems like somebody who would write a book on dead people though. Quit smiling, lady. Mary Roach.
Mary Roach. Oh.
What an apropos name, you know? I mean, come on. You made that up. It's like, my name is Mary Roach. I write about dead people. I mean, you're pretty much pigeonholing yourself if you're gonna write about cadavers, right? I mean, that's basically where your career goes to die. No pun intended.
I think that actually kicked off her career because she's had a couple of other successful ones, and she's a journalist who does sort of in-depth reporting on things. Like she did one called, is it Boink or Bonk or something, which is about sex, which was really fascinating, looking at the history of sex research and
you're right.
Again,
she
like weird taboos. And
Spook, Bonk, Packing from Mars.
I haven't read that one yet, but I've heard it's good.
Packing from Mars. Oh man, I might have to read some of her work. That does sound good. Searches for answers and questions about the gross and bizarre and uncomfortable aspects of space travel.
Yeah, and she's great because she just does not step back from an uncomfortable subjects. And as a writer, it's delightful to find journalists who are willing to do the reporting and talk about stuff that you just can't Google because humans don't want to talk about it, you know?
See, this is the reason that I never leave my desk. You know what I mean? Like clickbait. You find a
Yeah.
BuzzFeed article, and the next thing you know, it's like 3 o'clock in the morning, and you've still not reached number 72 in whatever list you're on. There are just so many
Yeah.
novels out there, and they just never end. It's why my phone weighs as much as it does. I have just so many novels on there that I will never ever finish reading.
Jeez, I'm
It's
glad my phone
ridiculous,
doesn't actually have to take on the physical weight of the books I read.
right? Do you remember when we were kids and we had to carry around the books that
Oh
we
yeah.
wanted to read? Yeah, it was
Yep.
ridiculous. I had to make decisions because you can't actually zip it closed.
No, I went out to
Oh, man.
Sasquan, which is Worldcon, when it was in Spokane 2 years ago. And when I came back, they made me take like half of the books out of my suitcase and carry them on because the suitcase was too heavy to
Ridiculous.
be
You're
loaded
not
in a
a
plane.
you're not an electronic reader?
I do both. I just happened at the convention. I was, getting signed copies and picking up free
Oh,
reader
cool.
copies and it's that kind of thing. So you end
I
up
wanted to ask you to change directions. I know we're reaching probably beyond the time that you allocated for this podcast. You've been a great conversationalist,
oh,
and I've
thanks.
really enjoyed the time that we spent together. But one of the things that really fascinated me about your experience with Jason was the fact you met him at PortCon. Now, I understand that's not too far away from where you are, probably your home in Maine, but
Mhm.
the idea as an indie author, you investing in table at PortCon, I know it costs like $100 or something like that. I think that's what he said it cost anyway. Have you found benefit in that to invest in tables at conventions?
Well, this is only the second one I've gone to. So it's a new perspective on this, but I will tell you for your authors out there, I'll break down the cost, which is it's $150 for PortCon, which is a relatively small convention. A lot of the table fees, especially if you're going to the bigger ones, I've looked into a little bit, and they get upwards of $600. There's no way I'm making that back because I'm just not
Who's
known
600
enough, and you've
bucks?
got way more competition.
Is that
That
like
was
New
one
York
of the
City Comic
Boston
Con
ones I
or?
was looking at. Oh, I
Oh,
haven't even
wow.
looked at Comic-Con. I bet Comic-Con's more. That was just like the BossCon or something. But for me, PortCon was worthwhile, and one that I did in Bar Harbor, which was a first-year super local convention. That was worthwhile. Made back more than my printing costs and more than the table fee, and I got my books into the actual hands of human beings, and got to invite people to read my next books. Had some interactions. So I think if you have a good local convention scene, it's probably worth doing the small ones. I can't tell you about the big ones yet because I have not yet tried anything of that scale.
That's interesting. So do you think, so you would recommend reaching into your pocket and doing some local conventions?
If you can
Yeah.
do it, I mean, start small and build up. The first one we went to, we were given the table for free because they were doing it as a fundraiser and it was their first year doing it. So they're just trying to get people in the door so that attendees would find it worthwhile to come in.
Yeah.
So that was a perfect place to start. And it was one day, super small. And we just decided to cough up the printing costs and see if we could make a go of it. And that went much better than we expected. We sold more than half of the stock that we brought, which was I think double our printing costs. And so we had enough capital that we're like, you know what, let's do a printing and try PortCon and see how that goes. And PortCon, the percentage of sales relative to the people there was lower, which you're going to see on a 3-day con, I think, because a lot of the same people are going to walk by your table. But the volume was high enough that it was worthwhile to be there for us.
Did you bark at all, or did you just make eye contact, smile? Did you just stand out in front of your booth? Did you have a bunch of signage?
Yeah, so we got a couple of posters printed at Staples. They have a relatively cheap way to do that. And my husband is a graphic designer, so he was able to make, files that are appropriate for big printing. And we stuck it on his background stand that he uses for his photography work. So very little money out cost, but big visuals behind us. And then we stuck all of the books that we had on the table to make it look full and appealing. And we just made eye contact and smiled. That was pretty much it. And it did all right.
Did you find obviously you're in Maine, but did you find any of the other cons through an aggregate, or how did you locate the cons that you decided that you were going to go to?
Well, the only two I've been to, like I said, it's just these two so far. The Bar Harbor one was, I think I got the invitation because of Family Connection runs some cons up in Bangor and knew the organizer and knew I might be the sort of person who could be persuaded to come, and gave them my name. And with PortCon, I went to college in Portland, so I was aware of the scene. And again, there's another family connection with those organizers, and that was what drew my attention to them. And it was small enough that I could afford to try it. So.
The randomness of life is just not appealing. I need to find some way to look through a list of some kind. The other day, there was an author that was doing a flash fiction contest. I was like, man, I could have done that. How come I didn't know about this flash fiction contest?
I know. I always find about those things like 30 minutes before the deadline closes. I'm like,
I already had the winners like announced. I was like, man, I could have been in that.
Yeah.
So upsetting. It's like, how come I can't know everything when I need to know it?
I share your frustration.
Yeah. But you know what? You also shared the last hour with me, and this was really, really cool. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, I already asked you what you're reading, so that's really cool that I have now a small list of stuff that I'll never get to because my list was already gigantic. So thanks for adding to it. I did want to ask one other question before I let you go. What advice would you give to a fledgling author trying to get their words out to the world, trying to get that novel completed, trying to do content creation? What would you say to them, frustrated in their, I don't know, basement or wherever they may be?
This is going to be really trite to anybody who's ever had conversations about writing, but I'd recommend that they read Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott.
What is Bird by Bird?
The point that it's a book about writing and about, oh, you should read it as a writer. It's absolutely lovely. It's a book about the writing process, but the specific piece of advice that she gives that gives the book its title is you have to, if you have an overwhelming project in front of you, as it is, if you're trying to not only write something, but get it exposed to the world, don't let yourself get overwhelmed. Just deal with the step that's in front of you, work on that step, and take it one bird at a time, essentially. Which makes more sense in the context of the book. I'm mangling the story, but the point is, you don't need, you're running a marathon here. You're not running a sprint, and you're going to burn yourself out and get discouraged if you assume you have to have this novel done by some deadline, or you have to be famous by some deadline. Like, just keep going, keep doing the best work that you can do, and don't give up.
Yeah, one step at a time.
I have no idea what that. Yeah, I don't know what that yields, except that it keeps you in the game.
The unfortunate thing is, yes, it's a marathon, but you never know how long the race is until you collapse at the finish line.
Yes, it's a race of undefined length.
Undefined. Man, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much. If you think of anything that you want me to add to the show notes between now and when I get the show up on YouTube, which is probably going to be in the next few days, just shoot me an email.
Great. Thank you. And thank you very much for having me. It's been a delight talking to you.
Yeah. Thanks for hanging out with me. I really appreciate it. You've been great. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks.
And that was Melissa Walsh. Next up, I do have Daniel Swenson. He is a YouTube personality. He is a co-host on the show Dungeon Crawlers. It has a gigantic following of 170,000 viewers when they post. It has a podcast. He is a new author. He's just recently published a book, and we're going to talk about it. Gorgeous cover art. Oh man, he lucked out with his cover art. It is so beautiful. But we are definitely going to talk about that and more next podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at BRYAIELLO, and of course my website is brianyellow.com. And as always, I really appreciate you listening, and it makes me feel good. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.